Welcome, everyone, to the Workforce Navigator podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a super interesting conversation here with Nicola Smith. Now, Nicola, you are not only a global VP of talent acquisition, you've got a long history in talent acquisition. In fact, you've got a history that goes back, you're British, you've been in the country for a number of years. I think you just had your 17th anniversary. Congratulations. But the commonality, you've started your own businesses as an entrepreneur, but there is a theme I'm going to let you expand on a little bit. Always a focus on the people. And so you're well suited for not only this conversation, which is about what makes a really good VP of acquisition. What do we need to be thinking about in terms of how do we become successful and build successful teams inside of our organizations that we all know are the key to long-term growth and success of the business. So with that, what I'm going to do, I'd love to have you just spend a couple of minutes and give us a little bit more of a background behind your career and your experience, then we'll get started.
Well, thank you, Steve, for having me on the show. So I'm Nicola Smith, and I have been in and around the industry. Sometimes I hate to admit this, but over 28 years now. I started my first talent acquisition company in 1997 in London. And in between have had different career paths. But today, the topic of our conversation is talent acquisition. So I will stick to that, and everyone can look me up on LinkedIn and see what I've done in between. I'm a VP of talent acquisition, and I've been with my current company for 5 years, and I thoroughly enjoy what I do. I think about my lifetime career, and I realize that the common denominator for what I do is I have a passion for people and looking out for people and helping people, building teams and building out company teams. And I guess encompassing that is company culture.
Absolutely. So these are all areas that we want to explore here on there. But one of the most shining examples of what's good VP talent acquisition is that we bring people in that like where they are and they want to stay. So we bring in the right high performance people for the right high performance teams, and the retention rate is quite high. So I would love to start there and just ask, what do you see is the role of a VP talent acquisition in creating that kind of a retention inside the company?
Yeah, well, it all starts right at the beginning of the hiring process. So we look at the people that we're bringing in. Obviously, we go for the top talent, and a lot of that comes around culture, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. But I think for a success in a company to retain staff is people first. People need to feel valued. And that all comes back to when we're hiring people. And if they align with our mission and our values, they're set up for success and they're going to stay because we're all aligned.
In order to get that kind of alignment, what that means is that has to be a really strong part of the recruitment process. That can't be something that we kind of figure out after the fact. So how does that alignment, how does that work into the recruitment process, and especially on the teams, because you're overseeing a team of individuals here?
Yeah. So as far as the recruitment process, that comes into the interviewing. So part of interviewing, I think it's really important to talk about the culture of the company, the values of the company, which I think if you have strong values and you have a strong culture, then that's the foundation for a really good or strong retention rate. Bringing people in that have the same values, they're going to feel like they're part of something right from the beginning. So if we can figure that out during the interview process, then when they join, they can just slip right in and there's no surprises and everyone is aligned on those values. So I think with culture and the industry that I'm in, there's creativity, collaboration, inclusivity, And that's so important when you're talking about the company during the interview process.
It's interesting because in some companies, corporate values could be that black thing on the wall, page on the website that gets written. And then everybody's like, yeah, we need to have strong company values and a good company culture. Nobody's going to say we don't want that. But the degree that it's emphasized and that leadership on down is strongly and firmly behind good company values and a company culture. What part of that is the talent acquisition role in making sure that culture and values aren't just a website page, but actually a living, breathing part of what we're trying to create and to attract and retain these kind of people?
I think you're absolutely correct in what you say. And it does come from leadership and it comes from leading by example. And when we think or talk or are in talent acquisition, that really comes through during the interview process. When you are talking to people on it as a candidate, you're talking to people that are in that company. They are living and working in that company. And I think it comes through during that time. And again, it comes from leadership. It comes from the top down.
It's interesting because candidates these days, they're as much interviewing you as you are them. And so many candidates, company culture is such an important part of how they determine where they want to go, what kind of company that they want to be in. And I've talked to C-suite leaders that have said, I'll look at companies when I made my last move. They were companies I just wouldn't work for because I didn't think they had the right company culture. That makes a massively strong statement of how important this is.
I think what work-life balance, that saying's been going around for so long. And I think there's good reason why that's been around for so long, because it's so important. And I think giving people the autonomy to voice their opinions as well, that is so important for people to know that they're going to have a voice in a company. Because if you're just a small fish in a very big pond, that's going to be tough. I think that's not what people are looking for. So I also think that when people feel included and they feel like trusted, they're going to stay longer because they're going to feel empowered and they're going to feel like they're part of something, which is so important for attrition.
We had a gentleman on the podcast and he was a CISO. So he was chief security officer at his company. And he said, Steve, when I came into this role, the number one thing I did, number one thing was assess the culture of the team and then the culture of the company. And he said, it's so important because we have to have an environment where everybody is incentivized to collaborate. There is psychological safety in doing so and airing ideas and opinions. It's just without that, what kind of creativity and productivity and tenure retention am I going to have? So it's literally the number one thing that I do. And we've talked to other technology leaders. I've talked to CROs and CMOs, and they attribute company culture to over 50% of the success of the business. So in your
Absolutely.
role, you've got obviously ties to company culture and your own team culture. And so I just want to ask on your team, how do you create a team culture that fosters success? Because your team's bringing in all the people that are going to be a part of this business. How do you do that? I'd love to hear that.
I think the big thing for me, you talked about psychological safety, and that is so important as a leader of a team within a company that people feel like they can talk about their wins, their challenges, and they can also feel comfortable talking about their mistakes. Because if you can't, to me, that's not my team feeling inclusive. That's them holding back. And I hope they would agree with this, that I'm a very inclusive leader. I'm very open. I'm very transparent. I want to hear all the feedback. I need an open feedback loop. Because if I don't hear feedback, I can't become a better leader. So during the pandemic, it was really hard. It was like spinning plates. This is my analogy. It was like spinning plates with my team. I had a large team at the time. We were hiring like crazy. I needed to make sure that they felt that they were part of something. Because really, when you think about it, during that time, work was really a huge part of what we had. And it was all like this, it was all over camera. So maybe I put too many meetings on the calendar just to connect with everyone, just to make sure everyone was doing okay. We were highly successful in our hiring during that period. And I'd like to think that I kept my team close and comfortable because everything around us was falling apart.
Yeah, it was such an interesting time. What is culture when it's all over Zoom or Teams?
About connectivity, again, it's about having the autonomy to use your voice because I realize now it's so hard to really feel someone's energy compared to when I go into the office now and the energy of a room full of people is very different to a room of Zoom heads, torso. So during that time or working remotely, I think it's about feeling comfortable to have your voice. And as I mentioned earlier, it's about voicing your successes and voicing your failures and voicing your concerns. To me, that's leadership. That's where it comes from.
Yeah,
Is
you mentioned something really important in there, failures. We're all going to have our failures. We're human. We're doing a lot of different stuff. But to have that psychological safety to know, I actually expect you to fail some of the times because that means you're not pushing the envelope. You're not trying new things. You're not trying to be creative. So that just means you're playing the safe. Then that means you're not going to be innovative. You're not going to be doing the kinds of things that we need to do. We're an innovative company. So one of the things that's interesting about this is if I asked you a question, I'm going to look at it from 180 degrees around the other direction. If I took away your team culture, what would that mean to you? Like, how does it affect you emotionally right now? If you were just a group of people that were working together,
everything. That means everything. You've taken away all that emotional kind of stability. And it takes time. When you're working in a team, it takes time to build that trust and to realize that the values that you talk about before you join a company are real when you're in it. If you take it away, then that doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel good because at the end of the day, we're all humans as well. Humans talking to humans, which is very important. I always, in my team meetings, let's just take a beat. Let's just take a breath before we start. Because I don't know what you just came from before we got on this call. You don't know what I just came from before we got on this call. So, usually, with any call that I have with internal clients, external vendors, whoever I'm talking to, I usually just take a breath at the beginning and just ask that person, are you okay? I think a lot of people in talent acquisition, especially if they're recruiting for high volume, they have to get it done. They're under so much pressure. We need to get these people in. Then it becomes a bit robotic. And then where's the emotional intelligence? Where's the human side of things gone? Which is something that's very important to me and so to my team.
I like the fact that we're talking about like what's happened over time here and like what COVID did and what it taught us and how did we react to that as a company, as a team and everything. What are the biggest things that you've seen that like a successful VP of talent acquisition 10 years ago versus where we are today? What's the difference that either skill sets you've had to acquire, a mentality you've had to change? What is different today than yesterday? Because sometimes when we look back at those differences, that provides a lot of clarity.
Yeah. I think going back 10 years is quite a long time to go back. If I go back 5 years, 2020, which was the start of the pandemic, I think things have changed quite a lot since then. and things are moving so fast. So for me, what's changed is many companies are still remote or hybrid. And so we had to learn, how do you do that? How do you do that within a company and keep the culture and the retention and keep your teams together? So that was a huge learning curve. I also think over the past 5 years, again, it's still moving very fast, is AI. AI has just kind of come in like a wrecking ball. I think it first came in and everyone was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is going to take our jobs away. And I'm talking about talent acquisition. And then I had to take a step back and think, actually, we can use this to our advantage. It's not going to take our jobs away because we are human beings talking to human beings about their life and what that's going to look like if they join this company or any company. And it made me realize that I should, and my team should, embrace AI, which we definitely have. I think AI is phenomenal at some things. It's getting better, sourcing candidates, finding candidates in volume. But at the end of the day, when I'm talking to a candidate, I'm talking to another human being, and that's never going to go away. Even if you simulate my voice, it just is never. Maybe I'm going to be proved wrong here. And we're going to look back at this in 5 years' time and go, she was so wrong. Look, there's a clone of her talking exactly like she does with a British accent, and they've got all her characteristics right. But right now, I think we need to leverage AI. And I say that to my team. I need you to be the expert in this industry, in this field. And to do that, you have to learn these new tools that are coming out, which we do. But then we add on that emotional intelligence part.
Well, it's interesting because candidates are coming in more armed with knowledge about the company than they ever have. It's not that hard to write a prompt about the company today and find out about the latest announcements, the launches, the philosophy of the CEO, right? There's so much you could do with a really not even well-crafted prompt these days. But on the other hand, we get to know a lot more about them as well. And in your mind, has that fostered better connection? Has that fostered a better dialogue in the recruiting process than we had before? How has that changed, like that interview, that get to know the connection between candidate and company?
That's a really interesting question. I would say right now for us, people do their research about the company, but there's a lot of false information online. And if you really want to find out about a company, you have to go to the source. And that source for you, if you're a candidate, is your recruiter, is your hiring manager, and then is your interview team. So I think my answer to your question is no, you can't. You can do your research, but I think the source is where you're going to really get the correct information.
The idea of correct information is all about, if you're looking at it from a way like a company does, and they look at their growth trajectory and they look at their customers and you define personas and ideal customer profiles, and what are their challenges and what are their needs, and you have a deep understanding of that customer. Has it aided at all in the deep understanding of your hiring manager, the candidate that you're recruiting? Like, how has AI helped in making you a better talent acquisition specialist, you, your team?
Honestly, I think it gives you access to more candidates. It filters and pulls more candidates than you probably could do manually. If we're talking about a certain tool that everyone uses, if you go through a platform where they're using AI, and everybody's using AI, they're all using it. That's the other thing. People use the term AI in different ways. You can say, well, I'm using AI, because I have a tool that checks my grammar. That could be AI. AI can also encapsulate, we can scrape people from all different platforms. We're talking about engineering. They could scrape it from so many different sources. That's a different type of AI. So I think AI, if we're talking about sourcing, can get us a bigger pool of candidates. Do we know that they're right from that information? Absolutely not. Do we know that they're right when we talk to them? 100%. It definitely helps for volume, but when it actually comes down to it, talking to someone is the only way that you'll get the information that you need.
It's amazing how in this day and age of rapid technological innovation, AI tools and everything, but it hasn't changed the connection between people and the importance of that.
I don't think it ever will, honestly. It'll be quite a long time before. And then again, I don't even know how you do that unless you completely, I mean, they are simulating people. There's all these things where, unfortunately, scams where you get calls from people that sound like your family in trouble.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there's the dark side of everything, but what we've been talking about here is the bright, the wonderful, the positive side. And I just wanted to ask you, we've talked about a lot here. If there was one thing that you wanted to leave people with, a one takeaway from this podcast for them to remember about what makes for a successful VP of talent acquisition, what would you say?
Okay, I have a few things. I feel like we haven't really covered this, but what I would say is that a VP of talent acquisition is not just about recruiting, it's about leadership, it's about relations, it's about creating strategies with partners for long term hiring. It's about bringing the right people into the company. And I would say it's about constant learning and research of, as we just mentioned, AI, the new tools, innovation. I will never stop researching what the next thing is. So I can't see there's one single thing that I would say, but the takeaway for the audience is that there isn't just one thing. Building positive environments. If that's within my team and then that emanates out to the company, which it does, because we're talking to people, then go out into the company. So it does start with us.
I love it. What's interesting is what you're talking about is one of the greatest opportunities for growth for the company. It's actually internal. It's how the culture we create, the values we have, how we treat people as humans, as the foundation to everything that we're doing. And so it's so true. It's why VCs, private equity companies, when they invest 10 million, 50, $100 million, they invest in the teams first. The ideas second. So basically what I'm taking away from what you're saying is invest in your teams. Make it a positive culture, a positive environment that people want to be in. People feel positive about contributing, no fear, but just, I'm going to say what I think is right. I'm going to do what I think is right. I might fail, but I'm not going to be reprimanded for it. If people have questions, would it be appropriate that we gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out to you?
Absolutely. Please do. Yeah. I may not get back immediately because, as you can imagine, I do get quite a few people reaching out to me. So I do get back to as many people as I can, but it takes me a while.
No worries. Well, Nicola, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what it takes to be a successful VP of talent acquisition. Because in the end, if we can listen and we can share amongst ourselves and that we can all make ourselves better, then that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. So I appreciate you being a part of that tide today.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was a pleasure.